Welcome to the Forest Analytics Landing Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Russell. In this podcast, we'll talk about how data and analytics are transforming the forest products industry. We'll share how a research-based approach to analytics can empower your forestry organization to make better decisions with your data. Welcome everyone to the podcast. This podcast is going to talk about the price of carbon. And a recent summary I did of some recent auction results from the California Air Resources Board. And so on a quarterly basis, the California Air Resources Board, which is the governing governmental body of the California Air Resources Board Forest Carbon Offset Protocol, it's really the only compliance-driven carbon market, at least in the United States. And so this program was created from legislation passed in California, and it includes all forest land that actually can be from across the United States. So despite being a California program, within their forest carbon program, there are properties across the entire United States. And so most people think of the California compliance-driven market or regulatory market as a cap and trade system. And so emitters purchase some amount of annual emissions and those allowances and what we call the cap. And so if those emitters release below the cap, they can sell those remaining allowances. If they release above the cap, they can purchase remaining allowances through a system like the California Air Resources Board has. And so the kind of work that CARB, or California ARB, does is really important. And being the only regulatory or compliance-driven carbon market in the U.S., a lot of people are looking at what's going on in CARB to better understand what might happen with some of the voluntary carbon markets. And so I did think it was interesting looking at some of the recent auction results from May. And so if you look back at the May results, actually the price of carbon per metric ton reached a record high. And this was a recent auction hosted by California ARB in May of 2022. And so they post all their information online through their auction information and results webpage. And so it's an important source of information and data for looking at the history of some of the prices of carbon. And what they settled on, the price of 1 metric ton per carbon was $30.85. And so if you look at their last auction back in November of 2021, the price was $28.30. And so that's a 9% increase over a span of about 6 months. And so really interesting to see the rise of carbon, the rise of the price of carbon, if you look historically through the CARB data. And so I have a graph, and I'll link to this in the notes. I have a graph showing the price of carbon through going back to 2018. Back around 2018, it was around $15 per metric ton, and now it's at $30. So it's gained basically 100% growth in the last 4 years. And so really interesting to see that tremendous interest in carbon. And the reason it's rising is because of all of the interest in carbon, from investors, from people wanting to get more into the ESG movement. Lots of people really interested in investing and thinking about carbon and the environment as an asset. And so a really important thing to be thinking about there. I think it's also important, being that California has the only regulatory or compliance-driven market with forest carbon. They're also in the process of updating their scoping plan. And so as a part of the regulation that really funded and really created the California ARB's Forest Offset Protocol, every 5 years they do an update to their scoping plan to see about how they're emitting or how they're reaching some of their emissions goals related to their program. And so that is something that's going on right now. That draft update has been prepared and it's undergoing review now. And I think an important component of that folks related to forests would be interested in is that this new draft update, it mentions how they're going to kind of deal with some of these periods of really high and maybe lower demand for carbon allowances. And so I think that's definitely something that will be of importance, particularly because there has been so much demand in the carbon markets recently. If there are more buyers than there are carbon allowances, then that can present some unique economic situations. And so really important to understand these carbon markets. I think kind of what we're seeing, at least in the California ARB system, it will provide insights into what might happen in voluntary markets moving forward. Again, the California ARB, they have these greenhouse gas auctions on a quarterly basis. They actually didn't have one in February of this year, so they kind of skipped a quarter, but the next one will occur in August 2022. And so again, I think it's really important to understand kind of where the price of carbon is and kind of the history and the trends of it. Again, it's basically increased by 100% in the last 4 years. And so I think it's really important as people are looking at forests, looking at natural ecosystems and natural capital as investments, really important to understand the price of carbon and how that might influence what we do in forestry and what we do in natural resources more broadly. So thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Forest Analytics Landing Podcast. For more information on how data and analytics can empower your organization, visit arbor-analytics.com.